Man, people that call MCU Spidey Iron Man Jr. are really just arrogantly missing the point, aren't they, Kyle? I like the Amazing Spider-Man movies! Oh yeah, sure. High school supermodel Brad Parker who never takes responsibility for anything. It's cool that you like it though, I guess, though. I mean, somebody's gotta.
You really are just arrogantly missing the point, aren't you, pup?
That is not very crack-a-lackin', fellow home dog. Ew. I don't want this in my collection, dude. You'd have to pay me to watch this garbage again.
Look, dude, I'm not gonna tell you what to think or how to feel about this movie, but I think we both know what you gotta do.
Hey pup, I hope you give The Amazing Spider-Man 1 another fair chance. It's a really solid movie when you keep an open mind. Cause I mean, there's a reason I asked my roommate to paint this for me.
Alright, one reason why you should give The Amazing Spider-Man 1 another chance is that it is one of the darker entries in the Spider-Man franchise, and it's unique for that reason.
Okay, so in addition to being the first Spider-Man movie I saw in theaters, I love the passion and energy that Andrew Garfield brings to the part, and that's why I think it's worth a shot.
If you don't watch The Amazing Spider-Man again, then I will drown a fish in water. I don't want to do it, but if you don't watch the movie, then I will.
Maybe it's time to watch the TASM series with an open mind instead of going in knowing you're going to hate it.
If you can praise Justice League for being the Frankenstein monstrosity that it is to cinema, but simultaneously can't look at The Amazing Spider-Man with an inoffensive perspective, I don't really know what to tell you.
The Amazing Spider-Man is quite possibly the most misunderstood, overlooked comic book movie in existence.
Alright, we can go for round 3 if you like.
Come on, pup. Rise above that.
Would you get off my back?
You owe it to yourself to be marvelous, so why regret being anything less?
That line was always stupid.
Oh, just watch the dang movie, Sparkles.
Okay, fine, for crying out loud. Before we get started, there's one thing I really want to get off of my chest. Discussions of your favorite Spider-Man can be a difficult thing to have online. We're all very defensive over this character. He really means a lot to us. And I'm aware that this fan base has a tendency to belittle one another over what their favorite Spider-Man is. And while this was never my intention, I do hold my hand up and say that I have perpetuated that. I may not have meant to, but a lot of my remarks about the Amazing Spider-Man film series will most definitely and understandably come off as belittling to those who like those movies, and me constantly reiterating, yes, but at the end of the day, I don't judge anyone for their opinion. Me waving that flag there probably just comes off as hypocritical more than anything else. And I really want to apologize for that. Previous videos on this matter have not handled the Amazing Spider-Man series and its respective fan base with any kind of respect. So it's time to get it right this time. So to fans of the Amazing Spider-Man, who this obviously means a lot to, I am sorry. I am just a dumb dog sometimes. Take 197. The Amazing Spider-Man is a difficult film to talk about. I applaud absolutely everyone and anyone who has made a video essay about this successfully. There's a bunch of great video essays regarding The Amazing Spider-Man 1 that you can also check out online. Hassan Hamid's videos, The Amazing Spider-Man, Why It's Amazing, great video essay. On the Instagram of The Perks of Being a Wall Crawler, there is quite the channel pup roasting on there, but he is absolutely right. And of course, the guy who needs no introduction, High Top Films' video essay on the Almost Amazing Spider-Man. Some really persuasive arguments being made there, so give a big hand to those guys. I spent a good long while listening to what other people liked about the Amazing Spider-Man and really just taking it all in. It's safe to say that as far as Spider-Man films go, the Amazing Spider-Man series has been something of a boogeyman to me. Let me get one thing out there, I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. When it comes to Spider-Man, I get extremely defensive. When it comes to other comic book characters, there tends to be a little bit more leeway for interpretation, as far as things go personally, but with Spider-Man, I basically turn into a massive Nerdosaurus 3000. As I said before, The Amazing Spider-Man 1 was in a very tough position. It was the very first reboot of Spider-Man, it came after the more beloved series had come to its end, and it was the one thing keeping the rights from going back to Marvel. Now I'm gonna say this right now, time has not been kind to The Amazing Spider-Man 1. It's not that the film aged badly, but looking at the bigger picture, at the time The Amazing Spider-Man 1 came out, there were 3 Spider-Man films I would rather watch than The Amazing Spider-Man 1. As of now, there are now 6 movies I would rather watch than The Amazing Spider-Man 1, effectively rendering The Amazing Spider-Man completely worthless. And as well as that, when people think The Amazing Spider-Man, they tend to think The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a film that even Amazing Spider-Man fans struggle to defend. The truth is, I really hate hearing people say how the original Spider-Man films suck because they're not as comic book accurate as the ones that we have now. I'm always like, are you so inept that you cannot just sit down and watch these things within the context that they were intended? But then, what am I doing with The Amazing Spider-Man? And you know, if there's one thing I really can't stand, it's hypocrisy. But then, what have I been doing for the past 2 years? I saw The Amazing Spider-Man as this heinous film that took Spider-Man away from me. I basically dragged this film in particular through mud. But upon really learning to understand this film, and learn to appreciate what this film set out to do, I can see that this film was not some big 10-foot sand monster that went out of its way to kill my precious Raimi series, but just a film that did its best to do right by Spider-Man, and couldn't possibly have known at the time how it would fall into the grand scheme of things when it came to Spider-Man movies going forward. The mistakes of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the reboot into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, these are not flaws of The Amazing Spider-Man 1. The Amazing Spider-Man 1 set out to address a lot of the problems that people had with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. As far as audiences at that time were concerned, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films were goofy and dated, so The Amazing Spider-Man takes a more contemporary approach. Tobey Maguire looked weird when he was crying, so they got a more conventionally attractive actor with a more stable face. The love triangle with Mary Jane was just too much, so they introduced Gwen Stacy as a much more straightforward A to B love interest, born entirely out of chemistry. Peter Parker didn't quip enough when he was being Spider-Man, so he quips a lot more in this film. Fans wanted mechanical web shooters, so they gave it to them. And with all that in mind, The Amazing Spider-Man can begin to feel a little bit corporate focus group driven, as some of these fresh new cogs they've introduced to this big machine just don't quite tick right for me now. But at the time of The Amazing Spider-Man's conception, these were all things that I, as a Spider-Man fan, was asking for. As a younger guy, I was not interested in having a Peter Parker that emotes like a real human being. I wanted more of a cool guy that I could look up to. I didn't want to spend time bogged down by a love interest that's not going anywhere. I just wanted to get straight to the point. As I've grown older, I've learned to appreciate the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy a whole lot more, as I relate to it a lot more as an adult. But as a teenager, The Amazing Spider-Man was pretty much exactly what I asked for. The Amazing Spider-Man was a reboot geared up particularly towards addressing the faults that younger folks had with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. It was a Spider-Man for the at the time now generation. Something more high schooly, less classic Hollywood, more contemporary, with more technology, grounded in reality to match more the feel of the Christopher Nolan Batman films that were at that time extremely successful. But the question is, do they make these changes work? Something that works quite well about The Amazing Spider-Man is how they've managed to take a more conventionally attractive actor, but still have them play kind of the teenage loner. This Peter Parker isn't a loner because he's a complete inherent loser. He's more just a young guy floating around in the ether going through the motions, because he's a little bit detached from his sense of humanity. He's not always considerate, he coasts his way through school, and he's not a particularly grateful surrogate son to Ben and May. Now you could just say that he's a douchebag, but to be 100% fair, his own parents walked out on him. If there is one thing that is supposed to be a constant that you can rely on growing up, it's your parents. Believe me, I know. So this Peter Parker has kind of grown up believing that there's no one he can truly rely on, and he's pretty much just waiting for the veil to slip on Aunt May and Uncle Ben eventually. Everybody's a hypocrite in Peter's world, and I'll be honest, in the past I've called this version of Peter Parker a douchebag because of this, but watching this film with a lower blood pressure level than I usually do, I was able to appreciate this more realized and fleshed out version of Peter Parker. He's got a fair bit going going on from the get-go, making this film a much larger learning curve for this Peter Parker, and making Peter's journey to becoming Spider-Man a much more personal journey. But I won't lie, there are moments that are quite difficult to stomach in this film, such as Peter fraudulently stealing another person's ID card to get into Oscorp. I can't help but think about the horrible repercussions this is going to have on the real intern, while Peter just kind of laughs and bites his nails. I don't think we're supposed to think about it that much, but I just can't help it. But I can also appreciate this film's attempt at tying the world of Peter Parker together in a nice bow. He gets bit by the radioactive spider at Oscorp. Why was he at Oscorp? Because he wanted to research what happened to his missing parents, which is why he lives with his aunt and uncle. That's all pretty tight. And to be fair, another nice little touch with this Peter Parker is that he's a skateboarder. This is an activity that he can do on his lonesome, so it's not like he's doing sports and fraternizing with the likes of Flash Thompson. It fits in well with his character, and it also means that he has some sense of physicality from the get-go, meaning that the story doesn't have to rely on the spider giving him magic muscles or anything. And Uncle Ben and Aunt May are a bit more involved in the life of this Peter Parker than before. I really love Martin Sheen's Uncle Ben, actually. We actually really get to know this character a lot more than we did the Cliff Robertson version, while this character is still alive. And I know a lot of people make fun of it, but I actually really appreciate the fact that they didn't go ahead and say with great power comes great responsibility. They gave him a phrase that alluded to it. This is, to be 100% fair, how people talk in real life, which bodes well with the more grounded direction that the Amazing Spider-Man is taking. When Uncle Ben does die, it's not just an overnight switch for Peter Parker to become the Spider-Man that we know and love. Sure, there is a lesson to be learned from the death of Uncle Ben, but it's not one that he learns immediately, it's one that he more pieces together over the course of the movie, through interaction with other characters, including Captain Stacy, Gwen Stacy, Aunt May, Dr. Connors. There's a bunch of different characters that get more of a chance to shine in this origin story than just Uncle Ben. It's a much longer and more drawn out story, which means that once he does put on the red and blue Spider-Man costume, he's not necessarily Spider-Man just yet. He's not necessarily the embodiment of power and responsibility just yet. What I mean by this is that the construction of the ideal is a lot slower. Peter begins very self-serving in his career as Spider-Man. He's trying to hunt down the killer of Uncle Ben, and he's interested in nothing else. When people say that all that the death of Uncle Ben instilled in Peter was a sense of revenge and not responsibility, they are absolutely right. Peter goes out, gets revenge, heralds himself as a hero to Captain Stacy, and it's Captain Stacy that calls Peter out on the hypocrisy here, spelling out the actual flaws in Spider-Man and sinking in that with great power comes great responsibility. By the end of the film, Peter uncovers a voicemail from Uncle Ben, and that's where the impact of Uncle Ben's death starts to actually kick in for Peter. The mantra was always right under his nose. He needs to be a better man now, a better Spider-Man. Because of the nature of this arc though, it makes Peter a much more difficult character to invest in from the get-go, which is probably another reason why people just didn't have the patience for this movie. We don't see that Spider-Man until the very final swing of this movie, after all of the lessons learned over the course of this film and one final voicemail from Uncle Ben. That's a sound basis for this first episode. It is more grounded, it is more convincing, it's everything we asked for at the time. So why did it not resonate as well with audiences? I think by and large, we were all pretty happy in the knowledge that we know Spider-Man's origin story, and would rather have seen this Spider-Man introduced at another point in his life. While this film does well to kind of realize and ground that origin story, it is ultimately a story we've already seen before on film. What this film does is take that origin story that a lot of people, including myself, weren't interested in seeing again, and stretches it out to the entire runtime. Which means that we don't really get to see much of the Spidey that we know and love, meaning that a lot of people probably didn't feel they got their money's worth. While this may work for enthusiasts and fans of the series, for general audiences that was always going to be a hard sell, especially when unloading Peter Parker's missing parents into the family dynamic. A big part of the ad campaign was the untold story of what happened to the Parkers. While Ultimate Spider-Man fans would have been over the moon, many others were just not interested. Another problem with this film is it does so well at grounding Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but it all goes out the window the second the Lizard arrives. The Lizard was not the right villain choice for this film. Now, I understand why they included him. The previous Spider-Man films by Sam Raimi had Dr. Connors in there as a character, but we never got to see him actually become the Lizard. The Amazing Spider-Man takes that one little thread from the Raimi trilogy and makes it into the villain of its first chapter. This would actually go on to become common practice in Spider-Man films going forward, with Spider-Man Homecoming using the Vulture, a villain originally intended for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man before. But we got this very carefully plotted, realistic Spider-Man film, which doesn't rely on such tropes as magic muscles, webs slinging out of a guy's wrists, wanting to buy a car to impress the girl next door. It's more of a film that's about identity. And now you have to introduce a giant lizard into that mix, who wants to take over New York City by turning everybody into lizards. So after all of the hard work the Amazing Spider-Man does to ground the Amazing Spider-Man into a contemporary world, we're immediately thrust back into old school Hollywood territory, meaning that this film ultimately cannot fulfill its unique selling point amongst the array of other Spider-Man films. Now, there is a lot of cut content here. There was going to be a bit more to Dr. Connors, his motivation being that he was missing an arm and wanted to hug his son, and that's why he injected the lizard DNA. That's not in the final film, which would have made the lizard a lot more compelling even if he still wasn't realistic. Another positive thing I will say is that the lizard still looks visually fantastic. And there were some great scenes dedicated to him. I really enjoyed Peter Parker spinning a giant web in the sewers to detect lizard activity through vibrations. Very clever. And after the lizard uncovers Peter's true identity, he goes to his high school to fight with him. That was a really cool fight scene. But the plot device that leads to the discovery of Peter Parker's true identity is so thin on the ground this time around, with it literally just being a note on Peter's camera saying property of Peter Parker, a plot device that was used in a Simpsons episode. After how well handled previous identity reveals were done in the allegedly cheesy redundant Spider-Man film series, this is so lacking. While the world building is pretty good, the overall catalysts within the storytelling this time are so much thinner, and a lot less convincing. And in a film that's supposed to convince you that this stuff is real and happening right before your very eyes, that's not a good thing. Another thing I just quickly want to add is I love how spidery Andrew Garfield looks when he's moving around as Spider-Man. When he's jumping up onto the wall trying to avoid the lizard, and he's flipping around the wall and everything. It doesn't look as stuntman-y as previous Spider-Man films looked. Andrew Garfield moves like an actual spider. He's very wiry and lanky, which is an absolute superb physicality for this Spider-Man, and the suit really complements that. While the Amazing Spider-Man 1's costume is one of my lesser favorite Spider-Man costumes put to screen, it really looks good on Andrew Garfield, and the way it sort of reflects light and everything really adds to it feeling like this is an actual spider. It's inspired. As far as it looking like something that teenage Peter Parker could actually make, nope, it still doesn't work, and trying to show me him actually making it to convince me that just makes me even less convinced than I was before. I would rather have a suit that looks absolutely gorgeous and like $1 million movie masterpiece that doesn't convince me at all that it's homemade than a suit that tries to convince me that it is homemade but doesn't look homemade in the slightest. It just looks a little bit like it's a little deliberately shoddy this time. But it doesn't look too bad. It looks okay. I also think Gwen Stacy was a good catalyst for Peter kind of rediscovering some of his humanity. She's kind of the one person he actually trusts as opposed to her just being like a goal point for Peter Parker. It works. So the Amazing Spider-Man overall is kind of like the grounded, realistic one, but it definitely doesn't fully succeed at being that. And I think the grounded, realistic Spider-Man with a slow burn version of a story we already know was never going to resonate with the large general audience in the way that the Raimi Spider-Man did, where it got to the point a lot quicker and just went out of its way to thrill the audience. Those good old-fashioned Hollywood thrills and all of their everyman nuances are things that I feel a teenager such as myself that loved The Amazing Spider-Man has grown a whole lot more fond of, now overshadowing The Amazing Spider-Man in a very painful way. That's not to the fault of The Amazing Spider-Man, because at the end of the day, it was a film that did as it was asked. But I think that does explain why this version of Spider-Man just didn't resonate with audiences in the same way that the previous one did, and the current one went on to do. There's a lot to take in with this film, and it's a less breezy-paced film than we are used to when it comes to Spider-Man and superhero films. Not to mention, its release came about at the end of the Dark Knight trilogy and the rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which presented us with a tone that would just better fit Spider-Man. Let's not forget, this came out the exact same year as the first Avengers movie. And I think that is why the Amazing Spider-Man series just didn't work in the end. We had this first film that dedicated itself to correcting every single problem that people had with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Then when this didn't resonate with the general market, the Amazing Spider-Man 2 went on to try and correct every single problem that everybody had with the first Amazing Spider-Man film. And the more that they tried to overcorrect the Amazing Spider-Man, the less of an impact that this film series had on audiences. And I think that is what made the Amazing Spider-Man much more of a red-headed stepchild over the years. As well as just for me, it's less enjoyable overall. There's quite a lot of exposition this time around, and there's a lot less thrills. While you do get to see Spider-Man suited up at the middle of the film, you don't get to properly see him embody Spider-Man until the very end. So people just didn't walk away feeling like they got their money's worth out of this one. The Amazing Spider-Man is a perfectly good niche genre film. Flawed? Yes. But it's really not a bad movie, like I myself in the past have made out. It really isn't. But I do understand why there are people who love this film, and why there are people, such as myself, who are a lot more dismissive of it. But as I said, I understand greatly why The Amazing Spider-Man resonated so much with a lot of people. And you know, I really do regret that this Spider-Man never really got to come into his own. He never really got to have a sequel in the way it was originally intended from the get-go. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 really isn't much of a sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man 1 at all. And because of the declining quality, understandably, it was axed early, but it means that this Spider-Man never really got to climb the wall. This Spider-Man was flushed down the water spout just a bit too early. And I think what it all boils down to is a clash in the team dynamic. People often like to blame everything onto Avi Arad. And don't worry, you and me both. He's a businessman at the end of the day. He knows what's going to sell. He wants lots of big action set pieces and the lizard and killer monsters and fan service. Mark Webb is an incredibly passionate filmmaker and it shows. He wants to make this very thoughtful rom-com. And there's an abundance of very impassioned filmmakers involved in the actual production of this project, and it all comes to a clash with the overall corporate goals. But the truth is, if The Amazing Spider-Man were just this quirky rom-com, nobody would go and see it. It's the sad truth. It might be a great film, but it's not marketable. So people like Avi Arad, maybe not Avi Arad in particular, but people like Avi Arad are kind of a necessary evil when it comes to marketing a superhero movie. These things are made for market at the end of the day. It is business. And The Amazing Spider-Man is such a split, such a at odds with itself film, that you basically don't get your realistic Spider-Man film, and you don't get all the thrills either. The end product is pretty discordant, and overall just leads to kind of a minimal sense of satisfaction. It is flawed, but can I call it a bad movie? No, I can't. It's a fine movie that has quite a bit going for it. But as I say, time has not been kind to this one, and it still sits as one of my least favorite Spider-Man films. And this very much comes from kind of a preference, but I feel like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films fulfilled their overall purpose a whole lot better. They were more true to themselves. The same goes for MCU Spider-Man, which leaves this one at a bit of a disadvantage. But I mean, hey, it's not The Amazing Spider-Man 2, right? Okay, Amazing Spider-Man, fair enough. You've convinced me.
Everybody gets one.
Hey, before you go, do you reckon there's just one thing you could do for me? Do you think you could rewatch Spider-Man 3 and see in it what I see, maybe?
What's that, Pup? I can't hear you. I think you're cutting out, or YouTube copyright struck you. Nope, can't hear you.
Come on, really, dude.
Nah, this thing ain't working. I can't hear you or see you. Pup, hello? Okay.
What do you guys think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, why don't you head over to channelpup.net, where we got a blog page called Dr. Blogtopus, but as well as that, you can also buy merch, such as this awful t-shirt. But if you want to be a part of the super fun Kennel Club, why not hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below, you can check out the links to my Patreon and my Twitter. I think that would be pretty sweet for both of us. What do you say, champ? But in all seriousness now, thank you so much for watching, my fellow home dogs. Have a great day, because you and I both know you've earned it. I'll catch you next time. That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you? Because you could get a way better costume from Zentai Zone. Check out their range of custom-made, tailored superhero costumes. Ridiculously good quality, value, and customization. Link is in the description below, as well as my coupon code CHANNELPUP, where you can get a discount off of your purchase. And while you're at it, why not get your suit designed by my talented buddy Dan from New Blood Dan's workshop? You can contact him via the link in the description below. Seriously guys, you do not want to miss out on your chance to be your favorite superhero and feel authentic and professional. And you don't want to miss out on that Channel Pup discount.